Welcome, everyone. Today what we're going to talk about is carbohydrates prior to and during exercise that's less than 90 minutes. Last time, remember, we talked about carbohydrates 3 to 4 hours before. So one of the things, why would you have carbs before exercise? Well, one is, essentially what you want to do is maintain blood glucose levels. But remember that the type of carbohydrate you consume will impact whether you maintain blood glucose levels or not. So that variable is impacted by the timing, the carbohydrate type, and whether you consume carbohydrate during exercise or not. So this is a very good study right here. They gave 75 grams of glucose 15 minutes before exercise. And when they did that, what you're looking at is hypoglycemia, which is about 3.5 millimolars of blood glucose, or about 60 or slightly under 60 milligrams per deciliter. So what I want you to notice is that if they consume the carbohydrates 15 minutes before, they only 25% became hypoglycemic. 45 minutes before, 38% became hypoglycemic, and 75 minutes before, 63% became hypoglycemic. So that is when you consumed it 75 minutes before. That's when you consumed it 45 minutes before, and that's when you consumed it 15 minutes before, and that's blood glucose levels starting the bout. Then they ran for 65% VO2 max for 20 minutes, and then they performed a time trial. What you notice is that by the time they got to the time trial, there was no difference at all between plasma glucose levels. And that's because we have what we call counter-regulatory response, which is essentially, for example, epinephrine and norepinephrine in a lowering of insulin. And when you do that, you're going to increase gluconeogenesis, hepatic glucose output, and things of that nature. Now, the thing to understand, though, is that there's no impact on performance. And again, it's probably due to the counter-regulatory response. Now, when you go out and run or whatever, if you get a counter-regulatory response, it might overcome that hypoglycemia. However, if you're a baseball player and you down a Gatorade, an hour before while you're on the bus or an hour before you go out on the field, you're not actively running, so you may not get that counter-regulatory response, and you might go hypoglycemic, which is going to affect your entire gameplay because you can't focus, and baseball's a game of concentration. Same thing would occur for something like golf. Now, this is a great study, and essentially what they're looking at is carbohydrate timing and high-intensity performance. So we got 3 conditions. Carbs at 6.4% solution, given 30 and 120 minutes before exercise, or a placebo. What we're looking at is that the time to exhaustion at 90% VO2 peak, or peak cycling power. Notice that the group given carbohydrates 30 minutes before exercise had a better response than those given 120 minutes before exercise compared to the 2 placebo conditions. So what this again indicates is that it sort of supports our previous model that it's probably better to have the carbs closer to exercise than like an hour or an hour and a half, 2 hours before, likely because of that hypoglycemic response. However, if you're taking it 30 minutes before, you don't have that same opportunity to go hypoglycemic. So, one thing we got to consider is the glycemic index. Now, for years, the glycemic index has been purported to lower insulin levels, increase plasma-free fatty acids, increase fat oxidation, extend glucose sources during exercise, and spare available glycogen. So these are one of the things that low glycemic has been reported to do. So remember, hypoglycemia is going to be considered like 3.5 millimolars or less. And what you see on the graph on the left is plasma glucose levels. So essentially they gave 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of low versus high glycemic carbs 30 minutes before 120-minute 70% VO2 peak. Bout followed by 30-minute performance trial. Now watch this. This is the high glycemic index condition right there. Notice their blood glucose spikes, but however, by 60 minutes, it drops. So that they're going in an exercise session hypoglycemic. Another thing that I want you to notice here is if you look right there, that's plasma-free fatty acid levels. They're lowest in the high glycemic condition. And the low on the control, they're maintained. So again, look at this. That's the high glycemic index condition. They're low. So it was supported that you do maintain blood glucose levels better. It's supported that you become more reliant on free fatty acids. However, if you look at glycogen levels before and after the exercise bout, you didn't see any statistically different, differences in glycogen, and that's what you see on the left graph there. And there was no difference between total work done during the time trial. So it didn't impact performance in this shorter event. However, it has been shown to prolong performance in time to exhaustion trials. So, one of the things to realize that, again, during exercises, events lasting 1 hour or less, the counter-regulatory hormone response typically maintains or elevates blood glucose. Okay? So this is less than an hour. What does that mean? It also means that glycogen is not limiting during this time because it's less than an hour. So theoretically, carbohydrates should not help events lasting greater than an hour. What you see on this graph from Burke and Wood is pre-exercise blood glucose levels, and then you see post-exercise blood glucose levels. Notice they rise up. Again, the counter-regulatory response. So what they did in this study was they essentially infused 1 gram of glucose in the blood for a 60-minute time trial. And what I want you to notice is basically the graph to the right are individual subjects, okay? So what you're looking at is their time trial performance when they're on the placebo or their time trial performance when they're in the carb. You see there's no difference. And you see the black is the mean, the black line, there's no difference there. So essentially, when you infuse glucose, it doesn't help performance. And that's likely because, one, the counter-regulatory response is just fine to maintain normal glycemia, and muscle glycogen is not limiting. However, Eucken came along in 1997 with a classic study, and what they did was they had individuals consume the carbohydrate instead of infusing it, and they had a 2.3% faster time run. So this suggests that you take the same amount of carbohydrate and consume it as opposed to infuse it, and you get a performance benefit. What's going on there? The answer seems to be related to the initial cephalic phase response of the carbohydrate, or the oral response. So what they did here is they had individuals having a 1 hour time trial again, and they essentially rinsed their mouth with maltodextrin or a placebo every 10 minutes. And what you see here, if you look at the carbohydrate group, that's the black group, and then the white group is the placebo. What it's looking at is how fast, how quickly they finish this bout of exercise. Notice there's a clear difference here. And if you look, so the black finished faster than the white, and if you look at power output, the black group maintains power output higher than the white. So the CHO mouth rinse enhanced performance. We have a number of different reasons why we think this occurs. One is that, think about when you eat carbs, it's pleasurable. So you activate reward centers in the brain. By activating reward centers in the brain, you have lower perception of effort during exercise. And what that would do is that if I have a lower perception of effort, I'm going to select out, theoretically, an intensity that's higher to get me to the perceived exertion that I'm used to training at or running at. We also know that research indicates that there's an increase in corticomotor excitability when mouth rinsing. So one of the things is it works well with exercise lasting 1 hour or less because you get the cephalic phase response, but you don't need to spare the glycogen. It can improve energy without improve performance without added energy. And for those who experience gastrointestinal distress, this could be an option as compared to consuming normal carbohydrates. Now, what about resistance training? Here they had individuals perform 3 sets of leg extensions and then 9 sets of squats. And they had 40 grams of carbs at 10-minute intervals throughout a 40-minute session. So you had 3 sets 65%, 3 sets explosive light, and 3 sets one-legged. 10 RM to failure. Now, what I want you to look at the left is muscle glycogen levels. What you notice is that muscle glycogen levels post-resistance training is higher in the white, which is the carbohydrate, than the placebo, which is the black. However, if you go to the right and you look at carbohydrate and you look at placebo, the gray is pre, the green is post. What you're looking at is total work done with 3 sets of isokinetic leg extensions prior to the exercise bout and then after the exercise bout. Notice there's no difference between the conditions. Because even though it spared glycogen in this 40-minute all-out bout was not limiting. So here, again, they had subjects consume 0.3 grams of carbs or placebo before exercise and after every other successive set of squats. So what happens is subjects performed sets of 5 repetitions at 85% 1 RM until failure. They went every 3 minutes until they could no longer complete 5 repetitions. And what I want you to see here is that they both completed 3.5 sets and there were no differences between the repetitions performed. Also, what you're looking here is rate of perceived exertion during the carbohydrate group, during the warm-up sets to exhaustion, and at the end. Notice there's no difference in perceived exertion. Now, this is very interesting. In this study, they looked at total number of repetitions or total number of sets performed. And what they did was they had 80 grams of carbs before resistance exercise plus 13 grams of carbs after every 5th set. So what they did was they performed sets of 10 at 50 to 55% 1 RM, leg extensions, so they could not maintain 7 reps. They had 3 minutes rest between sets. Notice that the glucose polymer group performed 17 sets compared to only 14 sets with the placebo. And the total number of repetitions was greater, as you see on the right, with the glucose polymer than the placebo. However, you might be thinking, well, didn't this contradict what we just saw? No, not necessarily. It's a different situation. The studies we saw before, they were high intensity. They were 40 minutes or less. This session lasted nearly an hour. It was low to moderate intensity, about 50 to 55% 1RM. And it's not realistic for strength or hypertrophy session. It's more like a modified cardio session. Because even in a traditional hypertrophy, you're going to go 65% or above. So basically what this is saying is research indicates possibly with 16 sets of 10 repetitions, this might be beneficial. Greater than 16 sets, greater than an hour of training. However, the thing is, it's unlikely glycogen is limiting in this time case. So one of the questions is this a carbohydrate mouth rinse effect or a substrate effect? Now, this study essentially here looked at carbohydrate mouth rinse on intensity. Basically, they looked at 1RM performance. You look at the control group, the carbohydrate group, and the placebo group. Look at 1 repetition maximum performance, no difference. If you look at number of repetitions performed per set at 70% of 1RM to failure, you notice again no difference between the control, which is the white, the carbohydrate, and the placebo. So what some people think is, well, even though carbs are stimulating reward centers and motivation centers, these were trained individuals. So that neural drive might already be well adapted and not enhanced by the carbohydrate in this situation. So here, what we're looking at is what if you have multiple weight training sessions? So here the subjects lifted in the morning with carbohydrate during 100 grams during. They then had 30 grams of carbs per hour for 4 hours after exercise, and then performed 10 repetitions of squats performed at 55% 1 repetition maximum with 3 minutes rest until they could no longer maintain the 10 repetitions. So what you notice here is right here what you notice. If you look at the repetitions performed, the carbohydrate group had 198 total repetitions, 18 total sets. The placebo had 131 total repetitions and 11 sets. So take-home message, if you have 2 very high volume sessions, each lasting greater than an hour, then yeah, having carbohydrates during and after can be beneficial, at least for performance sake. So really sum this up, carbohydrates intra-workout can attenuate glycogen loss, but because glycogen is not limiting when performing low to moderate volume or very high intensity, it doesn't appear to benefit the performance. However, higher volume, 20 plus sets, greater than 55 minutes, performed at moderate intensities for high repetitions may benefit from CHO. We're unsure if this is a mouth rinse effect, a substrate effect, or both. And thank you.